here to the Seamus Heaney Theatre in St Patrick's College, DCU. Obviously I have a particular draw for Seamus Heaney because I work for Poetry Ireland, so let me fess up straight away. But it is wonderful to be here and to thank DCU and the library for making this possible. And so without further ado, I want to first of all welcome all of you, and then both of our patrons of Ibby, former President Mary McAleese and her husband, Dr. Martin McAleese, who are with us, and our latest patron, PJ Lynch, who will speak to us in a few moments. It's wonderful to have you here. We're so delighted. Can I also welcome Dr. Anne Looney? Thank you so much. But now it's my great pleasure to call on Professor Brian McCrath to officially welcome us to DCU. Thanks very much.
Bhain fáilte a gháil rih vacaine an seanach don ócáid speisialta seo. I'm delighted to welcome you all here this evening for this Ibby annual lecture and celebrating also the travelling exhibition of outstanding books. Can I start too by welcoming our two patrons, former President Mary McAleese and PJ here, Laureate Minogue. I also better mention Martin McAleese because not only is he Chancellor of this university, he's my boss. Probably good policy on my part to welcome him. But especially I want to welcome our guests of honour from Ibby International President Wally Dunkerson, who's going to deliver the keynote lecture, and Executive Director Liz Page here. You're very welcome indeed. It's a great honour to have you both here for the annual lecture. Great honour for the university to host the annual lecture here in DCU. Wally in particular is known for his passionate advocacy for children's literacy across the globe, and he's really recognised as a global ambassador in that regard, a global ambassador for children's rights and for literacy rights. I should say just a brief few words about the location because it was mentioned already. This is indeed the Heaney Theatre, although it hasn't been formally named yet. We're working with Mary Heaney to find an appropriate occasion, and we've a wonderful piece of art which is blocked off at the back there to unveil for that occasion, and it will be a wonderful occasion. But before I came this evening, I decided to look at the speech Seamus gave when I had the honour, my first honour as a president, to confer an honorary doctorate on him. And he gave a very nice address, as you might imagine, but the poem he chose resonates with this evening. It was called Alphabets. I'm not going to read it out to you, you'll be glad to know. But he said it was semi-autobiographical, but it was about his starting with his initial passion for letters, literally the shapes of letters, and how he built that up through his primary school, his secondary school, and on further. But I think it's relevant, the whole children's literacy and the obsession with letters and it being in this location. The other aspect of this location is you're now in what's Ireland's only faculty of education, something we created in recent years by bringing together 3 colleges of education, St Patrick's College, this campus, Church of Ireland College of Education and Mater Dei Institute of Education. Combined those with the education experts in the university and created DCU Institute of Education, which is located here. And I think that's relevant. It's particularly relevant because 2 of those incorporating institutions, St Patrick's College and Church of Ireland College of Education, already had a significant expertise in and passion for children's literacy, children's books. And now DCU Library, this library here, the beautiful library here, is home to an extensive and significant collection of children's literature. And these collections are continuously developing thanks to the knowledge and passion of the individuals, the academic staff and the library staff, and many of them are here this evening of the university itself. So that's why the library itself was very pleased to support Ibby Ireland to host this annual lecture indeed. So before I finish, I want to pay tribute to Ibby International as an NGO with official status with UNESCO and UNICEF. I want to commend its advocacy and promotion work for literacy rights for children and its appeal to all nations to promote the production and distribution of children's books, and we all know how powerful they are. I want to acknowledge the work of Jella Lepman, founder of Ibby, and to note that her work, and I quote, building bridges of cultural understanding, and building bridges is another resonance with our former president, Mary McAleese. that links very well with another DCU initiative, which is we became Ireland's first University of Sanctuary just over a year ago, and this is our first Refugee Week, believe it or not, and we've been celebrating and promoting awareness of immigrant and refugee rights this past week, students and staff doing that. And it also links in with our Centre for Children's Literature and Culture, our Centre for Translation and Textual Studies, and our Institute for International Conflict Resolution and Reconstruction, which was opened by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton just over 5 years ago. So many resonances indeed with this, and I think it makes it a very special evening for us as well. So before I finish, I want to thank Ibby International. I want to thank President Wally de Dunker, Executive Director Liz Page, Mrs. Bernadette Scheid, a Councillor and Deputy Head of Mission in the Belgian Embassy, I think who's with us here this evening, Dr. Anne Looney, our Executive Dean of Institute of Education, two representatives from our library, Ellen Breen and Orla McGay, and good wishes sent from the Director of Library Services, Chris Pressler, and finally our patrons, PJ Lynch, Laurie Minogue, August Iaruk Taran, Maura Nicolisa. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Brett. Hi everybody, it's lovely to be here. Thanks Brian for that very nice introduction, and it's great to see you all here, and it's a lovely theatre to spread this idea and to encourage these values within our island. And they're also working with Ibby International to help to spread them through the world. Our guest speaker tonight is passionate about encouraging children's literacy worldwide and providing access to good books for every child, and so to give them the opportunity to become lifelong readers. Long before his involvement with Ibby, Wally de Dunker was always interested in children's literacy. He started his career as a teacher with a special interest in promoting reading, and as the founder of a language reading method known as Leesdrach. Good pronunciation. Acceptable. After teaching for some years, Wally began writing children's books full-time in 2001. And in his books he regularly tackles themes which are rarely touched upon in contemporary children's literature. He often tackles big philosophical questions, but he makes them accessible for children, as in Shadow, where a boy called Lars is curious about his shadow. He steps on it and the shadow goes, ouch, and he has a conversation with it. And he asks him questions. What do you do when I'm asleep? What does a shadow eat? Eventually the two of them swap places. In that book, I love the fact that Lars is based on Wally's own grandson. And Wally and his wife and his family and his animals all play parts in his stories. His books have been very successful. They've won many awards and have been translated into 18 languages. Wally has collaborated in the process of adapting his books into films, television and theatre shows. Indeed, one of his books, A Grandpa with Holes, has been touring as a theatre play for nearly 20 years. It's getting on for a long time. Is it 20 years yet? It is, wow. A Grandpa with Holes deals with the very challenging subject of aging and dementia. Grandpa moves into a retirement home because he can no longer take care of himself. He keeps forgetting things, and he sometimes acts strangely, which can be funny, but it's also sad. The doll with holes, which symbolises Grandpa's dementia, was actually an old damaged doll in Wally's grandmother's house. And I think it's typical of Wally to take something intimate and personal, and like that doll, and to turn it into a symbol of something that represents an experience that many of us can relate to. In 2014, Wally de Dunker was elected president of Ibby International, and since then he has been working tirelessly to promote children's literacy around the world, particularly focusing on the rights of refugee children, underprivileged children, disabled children, and female children in societies where girls are routinely excluded from the educational system. I was very fortunate last year to be asked to speak at Ibby's conference in Seattle, and I got to meet Wally and got to know him a little bit. and I got to hear him speaking. He is a passionate speaker and a very thought-provoking speaker. It is my privilege to present Wally de Donker, President of the International Board on Books for Young Children.
I'm very honored by your words, PJ. Thank you very much. Dear friends, good evening. It is a great honor for me to be invited by Ibby Ireland to this special place as a speaker. Many thanks for your introductory words, PJ. Memories of Ireland have played an important role in my life ever since my childhood. You have illustrated a book about John F. Kennedy's visit to Ireland. The president described that trip as the most wonderful 4 days of his life. I was only 5 years old when President Kennedy was murdered in Dallas. The vast majority of Belgians at the time adored Kennedy. Just about everyone in Flanders worshipped him. My mother even wore a gold coin around her neck with Kennedy's image on it. During his funeral, which was broadcast all over the world, I was sick in bed for a whole day. As a child, I was greatly affected by his death because there was an atmosphere of mourning among all the adults I knew, both men and women. It was at primary school that I first heard the stories of that great Irishman, Jonathan Swift. I was particularly intrigued by his travels into several remote nations of the world in 4 parts by Lemuel Gulliver, first as a surgeon and then a captain of several ships. Fortunately, that title was shortened to Gulliver's Travels. For almost 300 years, the Lilliputians and the full-sized Gulliver have continued to fascinate generations of children and adults. The work is considered Swift's masterpiece, a classic of world literature. It was only later that I learned that he had written Gulliver's stories as biting political satire. I got to know Dublin when my wife and I visited the city about 10 years ago. We followed in the footsteps of James Joyce, Bram Stoker and Samuel Beckett. My wife was also a big fan of the actor Liam Neeson. This meant that the footsteps of Michael Collins were also added to our tourist itinerary, as was a visit to Kilmainham jail. We visited Temple Bar every night. For many of you, perhaps a tourist trap, but we really enjoyed the atmosphere and the live performances of Irish folk songs in various bars. But now, from my own personal anecdotes, I'd like to move to a much wider stage and to focus on the future of Ibby as a world organization. What is the importance of Ibby today? To see into the future, one must first look into the past. Let us go back to a time in which an organization such as Ibby did not exist. First, let us return to the early 19th century, when African American slaves were breaking the law just by being able to read. Their teachers were also harshly punished. The 1819 Missouri Literacy Law banned the assembly of slaves as well as teaching them to read and write. The 1832 literacy laws in Alabama and Virginia ordered whipping and fines for people who taught slaves to read. Flogging was also the most common punishment for slaves who pursued literacy, but they could also be branded or mutilated, their tongue slit, or even have their hands cut off. Around the world, simple working class people did not often get a chance to learn to read properly. Not surprisingly, as they were destined to work in menial jobs all their lives. This state of affairs was maintained by the landowners and ruling classes. They believed that if the masses were kept illiterate and subjugated, they would not rebel. This is a tactic that is still being used today in some places. Reading remains crucial for the freedom of humankind, and I believe that it's even more important today than it was a few centuries ago. Just before World War II, Jelle Ledman, the founder of Ibby, had seen the novels of Erich Kästner and others thrown onto bonfires. Books and reading were dangerous. She fled Germany together with her children and started a new life in England. During the war, she was employed as an advisor for women's and youth affairs by the BBC and the Foreign Office. When the war was over, she was sent to the ruins of Germany to work towards the education of young people. During her work, she saw the reality of an old idea of hers that children's books could play a role in creating mutual understanding. So in 1946, she organized the first exhibition of international children's books at the Haus der Kunst in Munich. From this exhibition, the International Youth Library was born, and Ibby followed soon afterwards. Almost all totalitarian regimes abuse children's literature. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia went as far as to ban the publication of all children's books. The Taliban prohibits girls from reading. We all know what happened with Malala Yousafzai in Pakistan. A moving speech by a young North Korean woman is doing the rounds on social media. Crying, she says, that they are not free to sing, to say, to wear, to think what they want. Books, songs, and films about love are completely forbidden in North Korea. Every published story is propaganda for the dictators. As a child, she even believed that the North Korean leader could read her thoughts. Brainwashing via children's and youth literature is unfortunately a frequently used tool in dictatorships. In December last year, the animated film Ferdinand opened in US cinemas and is based on Munro Leaf's classic The Story of Ferdinand. The book drew censure as well as praise when it was first published in 1936. Hitler and Franco banned it. Gandhi and Eleanor Roosevelt admired it. In 1936, Jelle Ledman translated the book into German. She wrote, "Ferdinand was a spectacular success. His creator should have won the Nobel Peace Prize." Soon, the story of Ferdinand could be heard being told on every street corner in Berlin. The first edition was out of print in the wink of an eye, and not even a copy remained for the files. We paid dearly to buy some back from the black market, where Ferdinand